Hey guys, it's Forgreen, and today I wanted to talk to you about the roots of why I became a collector of modern day Godzilla vinyls. There's a bit more of a layer to just, ooh, that would look fresh on my shelf. And I feel it would help you, my sole viewer, gain a deeper understanding as to why a nearly 50-year-old man still buys, expensive figures. But to get to the bottom of that, we need to take the Futurian's time machine back into the beginnings of pop culture and the dawn of movie blockbusters. Yes, folks, I'm talking about the 70s. Before we begin, I wanted to make sure some corrections to some statements I made in my previous video on the Godzilla 1955 figure review were corrected, for better or worse. For one, in my intro, I stated that Godzilla vs. Mothra came out in 1993, when in fact it was 1992. Sometimes those heisei dates blur together. Also, in the comparison section, I failed to properly state that Varan was a Bandai release, and accidentally lumped it in with the Playmates Rodan. And finally, I want to clarify the statement regarding the film's suit. I had mentioned that Godzilla 55's head and neck could move from side to side as well as his eyes. Following that, I stated that it was a feature not seen again in the Showa era. I was specifically speaking about the head-neck movement, as we have had seen Godzilla's eyes move from side to side a few more times, but I'm sure many viewers of that video rolled their eyes back when they heard that flub. It was another case of not being carefully distinct with my own words. I make mistakes, and I probably will continue to do so, maybe even in this video. If you catch any, feel free to comment nicely on the videos below. Now, on to the main subject at hand. So, I was born in 1974, and I always argue that the right moment. Jaws had come out, and 3 years after that, a little-known film called Star Wars hit the screens. These two films ushered in the summer blockbuster that went full throttle through the 80s until now. I think I was born at the dawn of modern-day pop culture. Cartoons were channeling more adventure over the goofiness of Hanna-Barbera slapstick of yesteryear. Robots both big and small were the craze thanks to the importing of jumbo machinders into the Shogun line. And among those offerings was room for one non-robot, Godzilla. Sad to say, despite being seen quite frequently on creature double features back then, the King of the Monsters had very little offerings in the toy department. My brothers and I were starved for any Japanese giant monster in toy form. My oldest brother was really the one who attempted to fill that void the most, and while that lumpy green monster with the shooting fists, roller skates, and a fire tongue eluded us, we managed to acquire some merch throughout the coming years. One of the earliest items I can recall my brother getting was the Aurora, or is it Monogram, glow-in-the-dark Godzilla model kit. Posed against a really small-scaled city, this rendition seems loosely based off of the King Goji suit from King Kong vs. Godzilla. He has a real saurian face, cast in glow-in-the-dark plastic, as was his hands, feet, and most appropriately, his dorsal plates. While overall I thought it was cool, I could do without the gimmick, and I would have loved just a simple solid color version. Following that, still in the late 70s, was this fun thing, the Godzilla Bendy figure from GLJ. Despite being a Bendy figure, he never seemed all that flexible, and if you tried to push the limits, the wires would start poking out from his arms and such. Another acquisition of my brother's. I remember suddenly thinking, but who will you have him fight? A common issue with Godzilla toys back then being that the Big G was the only monster worthy enough of producing. But lo and behold, my prayers would be answered. By the end of the 70s and the dawn of the 80s, Mattel would release one of the earliest toys I desperately wanted, Rodan. I recall getting him for Christmas, a huge win. Not only was he my favorite Godzilla monster at the time, but he was well rendered. No flying fists or wings, no tiny fire tongue, and absolutely zero skates. In fact, this Shogun's toy action features were true to his character. Flapping wings, an articulated beak, to which I would feed him Cheerios, and best of all, grasping claws. After all those years of wanting a toy for Godzilla to interact with, he was finally here, except I never had the Shogun Godzilla. Still, I love the toy, and I still stand by the claim that it was the best Toho-themed plaything to come from that era. But then the 80s took things a step further. I remember the moment well. My family and I were visiting Rhode Island, and before arriving to our relative's house, we stopped at a nondescript store. It was there that we discovered possibly the most exciting thing thus far, Godzilla's gang. My brothers and I lost our shit. A line of small-scaled vinyl kaiju figures, with Godzilla leading the brand. Although we couldn't find the Godzilla figure, we were more than excited to grab the others. While I had no idea who the other monsters were at the time, we quickly assigned them as stand-ins for his monster co-stars. Bemstar, my first purchase, would be my Rodan. My middle brother got Nokogirin, aka Megalon. My older brother bought Maruchi, and years after we discovered Terror of Mechagodzilla, he would be Titanosaurus. Eventually, these guys would find their way into our Christmas stockings. Mikilas, the new King Caesar, Ikarusu Planetaire was, with some imagination, Baragon. Ella King was the only one to retain his identity, and King Joe was never purchased. But my middle brother finally scored Godzilla on that same Christmas. It wouldn't be until several years later that I learned that these guys were Ultra Monsters, but I still enjoyed finally being able to stage an all-out monster battle a la Destroy All Monsters. Years after that, I saw very few Godzilla toys, and if I did, I never took them home with me. One year, at another novelty store in the Crystal Mall in Connecticut, I came across a box of Yamakatsu Godzilla figures, with Baragon being the one I clearly remember. It's crazy to think that this line has had so much more of a fateful batch of monsters, a batch I could only dream about when I was younger, than Godzilla's gang especially. But I was too focused on things like Transformers and Robotech at the time, and while I was amazed to see them, I didn't push myself to purchase them. Also, from the late 80s, during a field trip to New York City, while at the Fulton Fish Market in Manhattan, I stumbled into another novelty store where I came across a box of super deformed Godzilla sparklers, loose. I wound up taking a brown Mechagodzilla home, not sure why I picked that one out of all of them. I later painted him silver with a Sharpie to give him some accuracy. The last Godzilla-related item that I remember possessing was the Imperial Godzilla rubber figure. Most of you probably remember this guy, or even had him. It was the first time I recall seeing an easily accessible toy based off of the monster in retail. I believe this was a product spun out from the release of Godzilla 1985, but I could be wrong, as I remember getting mine either around 86 or 87. I found mine in a drugstore toy department. I nabbed him just to have a decent-sized Godzilla to mess with. My, how times have changed. Looking at him now, that gaping hollow maw with a god-awful red lipstick, is it? And those overly painted eyes with the starry pupils. Dear God, this thing was not the best, but he was better than what was available, which was nothing. It's been a neat evolution from having almost no Godzilla merch to having companies like Bandai, Trendmasters, and Playmates bring them to the US for us older fans. I hope this video sort of illustrated the itch that I sort of needed to scratch, with more than just having Godzilla himself, but all of his kaiju co-stars. If you like videos like this one, please comment down below and tell me your experiences growing up with Godzilla collecting. And also, I would really appreciate a like, a share, and even a subscribe to my channel, so I can keep creating more Gojira content. Thanks for watching.